in the house. Getting you guys some friends, don't you worry. Alright, chat, just so you guys know, actually I can just watch it here, that's fine. That's pretty gravy. Pretty gravy indeed. Alright, chat. How's everyone doing today? Everyone having a good day? We got a little less than a minute. Even though should have well started. But you know, it is what it is. Asmongold levels of snacking going on here. Today's snack, by the way, Snack Daddy presents Chips Ahoy for a higher class cookie. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go, chat. Seems we're stuck on 0. It's a little harsh. Oh. Everything went silent.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to
What's up, Lore?
World of Warcraft live developer Q&A. My name is Josh Allen, aka Community Manager Lore, joined here once again today by Game Director
Ian Hazakostas. Rocking the Legion shirt.
Yeah. Okay, we got a lot of questions to get to. Sorry, I had a couple of pre-stream hiccups, which we were able to sort through. I'm sure a couple people in the chat room noticed that timer ticking back up to 1.
Just trolling Twitch chat.
Just trolling Twitch chat, yeah. That's,
just trolling Twitch
anyway,
chat. That's not very nice.
Today with a really easy, straightforward question, which is, can we get a proper explanation on why you keep going with the GCD changes despite the absolute majority of the player base being against it?
Yes. Right into it, boys. Right into it.
Q&A bingo players at home. Let me pause 1.5 seconds, then I'll get right into this. Okay, so, yes, GCD. There's a lot of parts to this. We've talked a bit about it on the forums when the changes first rolled out, and it's been discussed extensively internally since then. So 3 things, I guess. First off, broad philosophy comments that are probably not at all getting to the heart of this, but sorry. Why would we ever make a change that people don't like? Why would we ever make a change that doesn't feel good? I think the first post that I made when the first changes were rolled out in alpha said something to the effect of, like, we know that initial reaction to this change is going to be negative. We made the change expecting that. Why would we ever do that as game designers? at the end of the day, of course, we want good feedback. We want everyone to have fun, to enjoy the game, to feel good about playing it. That's why we do what we do. It's to create fun experiences.
It doesn't sound like it's fun.
World. It's with an eye toward the long-term health of the game in a lot of ways. I think there are short-term changes that we can make. There are things that can be done to the game that feel good but cause imperceptible harm in other areas. To use and taking those things away is always going to feel objectively bad in the short term. So, random example, years and years ago, back in Cataclysm, in capital cities, there were portals to every zone around the world, and guilds had, a guild summon spell that could also summon you right to the entrance of any raid zone. 1 or 2 people from your guild had to go to the zone at the start.
Right.
You could just push a button. Everyone got ported there instantly, and a lot of the time, players could just log in. You're in Orgrimmar, you're in Stormwind, you get teleported to your raid, you finish raiding, you log off for the night. Or if you want to go out in the world and do something, you just port right to the zone you're going to. Those are all conveniences, certainly. Taking those things away, there was a lot of negative backlash and a lot of feedback on the removal of guild summons. Or
this is actually a legit
answer.
answer.
Less convenient, but that also led to a sense of the world feeling so much smaller. Of just this sense of I'm actually not even really in this connected MMO anymore. I'm just porting around.
Right.
And so, and that's not a direct one-to-one example. It's just the first thing that came to mind.
Sure.
But there are times where we're seeing broader negative effects from a set of changes, and we know we need to pull back some seeming quality of life improvements with that long-term goal in mind.
We're getting too complacent,
that's
boys.
One of the things that's interesting and challenging when we approach getting feedback on that change, because we know it's going to be negative in the short term. Like we are expecting that the initial reaction, of course, if on live, you're used to, hitting your cooldown macro and then instantly hitting a damage ability and having that go off. There's that jarring moment of like, I did the muscle memory that I have, and the expected result didn't happen. This feels bad. This feels broken. This feels worse. And that's going to take some time to overcome regardless. Now, that said, that doesn't mean, well, we made this change expecting negative feedback, so we're going to ignore all the negative feedback, and there's nothing that you can do that's going to influence us, and, well, too bad. You just have to deal with it. That's not where we're at either. We're already making a couple of changes to, things that have gone out in the beta. I think in one of the upcoming builds, players will see abilities like Heroic Leap and Infernal Strike back off the GCD. Disengage for hunters as well. We've made some changes to abilities like Fury Warrior, Bloodbath to give it some upfront damage component, so it actually feels like it's doing something instead of just a button that's empowering your future actions. And we're looking to make other changes to class abilities along the way. So moving on to part 2, I guess. The first part of this change that we made was all about offensive cooldowns. And I think that was mainly aimed at 2 purposes. One is from an overall class balance perspective across all facets of the game, trying to pull back a bit the importance and power of multiple stacked cooldowns, especially in a world where you can talent into new ones. It was such a no-brainer choice that they multiplicatively scaled with each other, and the damage that you did during your cooldown window was so dominant compared to what you were doing the entire rest of the time, that had some negative consequences. In PvP, whether that may be you blow somebody up.
This is a really detailed answer.
The worst case burst potential,
and that's
which
good.
Means that when you don't have your cooldowns,
because it means it's important,
and you're just kind of biding your time, playing defensively.
But we're looking at
come back up
a
again,
10-minute answer in a 60-minute segment.
What's the point in even hitting your abilities or trying to apply pressure when
maybe it's 90 minutes,
there?
But still.
But in raiding and dungeons elsewhere as well, ask any number of DPS players who pop all their cooldowns, then get targeted by a random boss ability, and that disrupts their rotation, that takes them out of the game. That is super frustrating, because you realize that if you're somebody who cares about good performance, you want to beat your own best mark from last week, your parse is completely shot if you lost the potential from your cooldown window, and there's nothing that you can do for the next several minutes of the encounter to make up for the fact that this 8-second window got disrupted. That's also a problem. And there's also not much extra gameplay coming from it. When you talented into one of those new abilities, you weren't modifying your playstyle in a meaningful way for the most part. You were potentially just adding an extra line to a burst macro that you already had on your bar. You're pushing the same keybind you did before you got that talent, just having it have greater effect.
We're basically just complacent.
That was one of the big
reasons
why we started by focusing on those offensive cooldowns.
We saw players getting too lazy.
That said, that's a start. This isn't a change that we see ourselves making and then just walking away from, leaving the classes intact, and shipping in the state that they're in.
Sure.
I think there's further modification that has to be done in light of this, and that's why we wanted to get the change out there early. And the best feedback that we're getting, and the most useful stuff to keep talking about, is not revert this stupid change, I hate it, it sucks. It's these things about my spec feel really bad right now. This feels awkward. You know, I've seen many, many times the, you know, Fury Warrior gif of, all right, cool down, cool down, cool down, cool down. This is Fury Warrior playstyle in BFA. Like, no, of course we don't think that's good. Like,
right, yeah.
None of us are sitting around saying, like, oh, yeah, that's totally fine. Mission accomplished. That's what we were trying to create.
Yeah.
The problem there partly was that, yeah, like, Fury Warriors had too many offensive burst cooldowns that did nothing but empower their future actions. And the fact that you could combine all of them into a single Swifty macro wasn't, yeah, that was masking the problem,
right, yeah.
not actually, you know,
Swifty macro.
So some of the changes I talked about with Bloodbath already are an example of things we're looking at. We have some other changes to Avatar that will be coming out in the near future. And then more broadly, you know, Fury is something that's still very much on our radar. You know, I think in the class update that was posted the other day, we mentioned a few other specs that were specifically and clearly missing. You know, they're holes in their talent tree. They're coming soon talents. Those specs obviously have further work, but all specs still have rotational adjustments that are on the table, and that's the feedback that we're looking at. That's the sort of thing we're talking about when we say we're curious to hear what feels awkward, what feels frustrating, what feels uncomfortable to use as you're playing your class, as you're playing your spec in the BFA beta. And then tuning in pure numbers will come a bit further down. That's kind of the last stage of the process. Anyway, so that's where we're at on cooldowns, offensive burst stuff. Second category of things that we changed were some utility buttons, some movement buttons. And this really comes down to a question of what sort of game World of Warcraft is. And contrary to, you know, some of the talk we've heard, things we've seen said, it's like, no, we're not looking to slow the game down further overall. WoW is a ultimately fast-paced game. If you are, you know, especially if, you know, depending on the class you're playing, Shadow Priest, Rogue, Feral Druid, whatever, you are hitting, you know, 50, 60 buttons a minute, if not more, not counting movement, not counting other things that you're doing.
Right.
Obviously, if you have longer cast time spells, your number of actions is a bit lower. But we see WoW as a series of rapid-fire decisions. I think skill and WoW gameplay are about evaluating the circumstances around you and kind of figuring out what you're going to do with the next few seconds. And you have a second and a half to decide and commit to your next action over and over and over again. And the difference in a good player and a less skilled one is just
there's a lot of decisions.
The rapidity with which you make those decisions, your instincts, your intuition about what the right call is. And the more things are off the GCD, and the GCD is kind of what sets that pace for the whole game. The more things are off the GCD, the more they either kind of remove potential decision making, because instead of choosing whether to do A or B, you're now doing just both A and B, and a decision point was gone. Or we're making skill more about twitch reactions, and those are things that are more subject to latency, internet connection, that sort of thing. And that's not, while WoW is a fast-paced, active game, it's not an arcade twitch reaction type game. That's not what skill in World of Warcraft has ever been set up to be.
Right.
And so, to use a random example, if you imagine, pretend that you're a dungeon healer, you're a resto druid healing a dungeon, and your tank is super low on health, they're critically injured, they're like 10% health, might die at any moment. You yourself are at 40 or 50% health. Not critically low, but definitely pretty badly injured. And suddenly, the boss you're fighting, or whatever trash mob it is, drops a patch of fire right under your feet. Now you have a decision to make. You need to heal your tank because they're on the verge of death, but you also are injured and standing in fire. What do you do? Right? There's a few options.
You don't stand in fire.
And pretend Swiftman's on cooldown. So you either are winding up a regrowth to cast on the tank, quick cast time heal, but then you're standing in fire, immobile, potentially dying in the process as you try to get that heal off. It's one option. Maybe you start moving out of the fire immediately and you throw a rejuve on the tank to, do something at least, to maybe tie them over a little bit until you can actually get some proper healing on them once you're out of the fire yourself. Maybe you wild charge out and then instantly get out of the fire, and then do something afterwards, whether it's a regrowth or an instant cast time heal. But if you do that, you're safe for sure. There's no way you're going to die, but now your tank isn't getting any healing. In a world where those abilities are all on the global cooldown, that's a semi-interesting decision space. Like, that's literally 1 second of time. That kind of thing happens in World of Warcraft over and over and over again. And one of the differences between a good experienced player and a less skilled player is just the intuition and the instinct to make the right call based on your read of the situation, based on exactly what health they're at, your knowledge of the encounters, whether it's likely that you or the tank are going to take any further damage in the next few seconds, and so on and so forth. Your better player will probably make the right read more often. But in a world where Wild Charge is completely off the global cooldown, there's actually a strictly superior solution to that problem. You just do both. You both blink out and simultaneously begin casting your best heal in the tank. And in that world, the difference between two players in terms of skill is more a question of reaction time, of did it take you 0.2 of a second or 0.3 of a second to realize that you needed to move and to hit those two buttons.
Right, yeah.
You know, internet connection and other stuff notwithstanding. Is that what WoW should be about? Or should it be about making decisions and planning your actions in a 1 to 2 second time frame? So that's sort of the broader philosophies that are motivating this. That said, you know, all of these things are still under evaluation, still under discussion. We're not really looking... I can't think of any other abilities that we've still discussed that might be put back on the global cooldown at this point. We think we've gone as far as we're going to. And there are some that we are taking back off, like Heroic Leap and Inferno Strike, particularly there, because I think reticle targeted abilities, there's a certain level of awkwardness where you try to use the ability, it fails because you are still on cooldown, and then you need to re-aim or replace your reticle. That feels bad. On the Hunter side, most classes in the game have to choose, range classes have to choose between movement and damage. One of the quirks and perks of Hunters is that they can do both simultaneously, and so there's something distinctive about being able to disengage out and fire off a shot while you're in midair just after you've done that. Yeah. And that's something that's valuable to preserve. I think
that's fair.
Reestablishing the global cooldown as a baseline also means that there's room to break those rules where it makes sense and to add extra flavor and differentiation between classes and specs. Like things like Charge or Dash, those are on the global cooldown even if it's a shorter one, whereas a rogue who shadow steps can do so instantly with no GCD, because that's part of, you know, the ninja-like flash movements of the sub-rogue. And so that makes Shadow Step even more special than it otherwise would have been in a world where everyone had these instant abilities. So super long, rambling answer. This is clearly addressing more than just the one question.
Yeah, putting down the fires.
Addressing a lot of discussion that's happened going on in the community for the past few weeks. This is a conversation that we view as an ongoing one, but I think the best sort of feedback is specific class-based, spec-based feedback about situations, about particular abilities, and not just this entire change is, you know, a conspiracy to slow down the game for whatever, because that's just not what it is. I think we are genuinely motivated by overall improvement of the game.
Come on, give us
trying to make decisions matter and trying to
address pack C's
to, you know, cooldown windows versus the standard baseline, things in that area. Apologies for the rambling.
No, it's fine.
Lots more questions to come.
It's fine. Yeah. We're gonna, I think you ended up covering. We had a couple other questions that were lined up about the GCD stuff, but I think you ended up covering them. So thanks to Benzin Stop and K's Cap as well for the questions that they sent in. TLDR, tell us why you don't like it, not just that you don't like it, I guess is kind of the core message there. But we are continuing to make changes to improve the GCD situation. All right, moving on. Next question is going to be from Last Derpus on Twitter, who asked, with artifact traits going away, how will class design change to fill the void caused by losing these traits?
Some become talents?
So, okay, in various ways. I think there's a misperception when it comes to most classes and specs that they were designed in Legion to be complete only with the artifact. I think that's not true. Most of the specs were designed
was supposed to be the
as self-contained holes, and then the artifact was layered on top of them. Now, there are a few exceptions for sure. I think Demon Hunter is the biggest one. Demon Hunter started at 98. They were brand new to Legion, and they got their artifact right away. The artifact was so fundamentally intertwined with Demon Hunter playstyle, that's a bit different than some of the others. Obviously, you know, over the past year and a half, everyone's grown incredibly accustomed to these artifact abilities. You probably last spec'd into them in September, October of 2016.
Right.
And it's easy to forget where the artifact ends and your natural class begins, and losing things never feels good. And we've learned a lot of lessons from how the artifact system worked and how deprecating the artifacts is playing out that will inform how we design these sorts of things in the future. That said, it's not something we can just ignore, and it breaks down into a few categories. So as players have seen in a number of more prominent examples, active artifact abilities are things that have become available through talents or otherwise, where they provided just interesting gameplay and not were just cool parts of the spec that made sense to carry forward. We're doing that. In lots of other places where there have been abilities, especially abilities added for the first time in Legion as part of spec overhauls, that were modified in small passive ways by minor artifact traits, those benefits have been rolled in to the baseline functionality, and that's something that we're not done doing. I think as we get into the tuning process, as we start to look more closely at damage breakdowns and what percentage of a spec's damage or throughput is coming from ability A versus ability B, that's a place we're going to look to dial those things in. Overall, if you're happy with the pacing of your rotation and your class in Legion, that's not something we're looking to change meaningfully in Battle for Azeroth. That said, our philosophy on class design broadly is to try to get the classes to a state where they can serve as a stable foundation for a set of additions, a set of options and variety that will come in each expansion in the form of items, in the form of external systems, but which can have depth, complexity, lots of choices, lots of customization, but which can be left behind once we move on to the next expansion. Because at this point, and we've learned lessons over the course of developing the game for coming up on 15 years now, we need to make these choices. We need to plan not just with the next 6 months in mind or the next 2 years in mind, but with the next 5 years in mind, the next 10 years in mind. And a world where we added, a dozen artifact traits or more.
WoW 2 not coming.
You kept those all effectively.
Not for 10 years
rolled into your baseline class. Then in Battle for Azeroth, we did something similar. We added a bunch of new traits, whether it's Azerite armor or whatever, and you kept them, and they got rolled into your baseline class.
Right.
That's not sustainable. What does that look like when we're in 10 years from now, and your spellbook is 5 pages long, and you have 6 different things modifying the functionality of a base ability? I realize I'm exaggerating a bit.
Welcome to World of Warcraft. Here's your 400-page manual on all the selections you need to make, and so on.
Nice anecdote, Lore.
Nice. That's how we're approaching this. That said, the artifact, it's ripping off a really large band-aid at once, and there's a lot of pain there that we could have done a better job of anticipating and designing around. We're not done incorporating elements of the artifact into the specs. I think that's another great area of feedback in terms of specificity of this particular trait made my rotation flow much more smoothly in Legion. I really missed this in Battle for Azeroth, as opposed to stop the pruning. You're pruning everything. You took everything away. That's not really actionable. Because the only way to act upon that would be just bake all the traits into everyone's specs, which isn't something that we feel like we can do with the long-term health of the game in mind going forward. Separately, short answer to a lot of this is also just Azerite armor. We are designing, we have players, you've all seen hundreds of new traits already in beta, and there's more to come across all of the different armor pieces and all the different specs. There are hundreds of new traits that are potentially rotation affecting, let you customize your playstyle.
So, yes, you won't have artifacts.
Choosing among them.
Yes, they're going to be talents.
Getting stronger versions of them as you get better pieces of gear.
Necklace.
And those are going to be many of the things
will help
that
fill the void in your
you
heart.
Customize your playstyle in Battle for Azeroth in a deeper way than you could in Legion. Whereas with Legion, once you got past the first couple of months, your artifacts were pretty much locked in, and the only variation was what relics you had. And even then, you may have had very strict preferences in terms of relics, such that you were using the same trait loadouts pretty much from, Emerald Nightmare all the way through Argus recently.
Okay. I'm going to drop a sounds good, makes sense, and move on. Next question from...
Bingo players at home. Happier by the
minute.
minute.
From Eliana. Actually, another question about the Azerite gear, who asked, currently in beta, you can't change which traits you've picked on your Azerite gear. Will we be able to change traits, for example?
I like how it's a lot of mechanics questions.
And if so, will it be something we can do?
What more allied races are coming?
Yes, we will have a respec system for Azerite armor. It's not fully implemented on beta yet. It's coming soon. The goal here is for these traits to be something where you feel like You can change them if you've made a mistake, if you don't like the selection you made on your armor, if you need to change your role. You know, your tank for your group is out of town for a couple of weeks, and normally you're DPS, but you need to tank. We don't want anyone to feel limited or locked into a set of choices. The extreme we want to avoid is where these armor traits feel like another 9 talent rows, effectively, where from boss to boss to boss within a given zone on a given night, you are switching around your talents on each piece of armor between fights. That's just a nuisance. That's a level of complexity, and like I said, it's at that point you're not really making choices. You're just following a varying template from boss to boss. So anyway, the plan for respec right now is very similar actually to how talent respecing worked in classic WoW. It's the ability to reset all your choices on a piece of armor on a piece-by-piece basis with a low gold cost that will ramp up the more frequently you do it. And
so old school talent way.
So if you occasionally want to, you know, fix your gear loadout, or you got a great new helm and you want to change over your old helm to be an off-spec piece now, that's trivial. There should be very little friction to that, if any. Like, I'm talking literally 5 or 10 gold as the starting point for this.
Okay.
Truly a small amount. It's a token amount. But if you are trying to change your armor talents around 10 times a week, that's going to rapidly become prohibitively expensive.
Okay.
Prohibitively expensive.
Makes sense. Next question from Ethera, who said, how will the more casual players deal with the Heart of Azeroth system if they wish to play more than one specialization? So you kind of alluded to that just a second ago with talking about the ability to, like if you upgrade your helm, you now turn your previous helm into your tanking helm or whatever.
Exactly. I think that in the long term, that's definitely part of it. So really, whether casual or not, I think in a lot of ways, Battle for Azeroth is an expansion that's going to be much friendlier to players who want to maintain more than one spec actively and competitively at any level, really, than Legion was. You know, I think in Legion, especially early on, I think these days there's much more flexibility. But if you think back to the early days when every artifact point mattered, and you had 28 points in your main artifact, and your off-spec artifacts were far behind, or when you only had 2 or 3 legendaries total, and they were for a specific spec, you were giving up a tremendous amount if you tried to play a different spec. Too much, in fact. And over the course of Legion, we learned from a lot of those mistakes and loosened that up. With the Heart of Azeroth, there's one single universal artifact that you're using for all your specs, so your progression there counts towards everything. Within the Azerite armor pieces, many of them have powers that are functional across different specs or different roles. If you want to use a single armor piece for all roles evenly, you can do that. You might be more limited in your choices, but that's an option. But then, as we've done,
look at Lur's face. He's like,
with
makes
slots,
sense.
like trinkets or weapons. In the long term, you may just have 2 pieces of gear. You may just have 2 helms, one that you use for tanking, one that you use for healing, the same way you have different trinkets. For the most part, the vast majority of pieces of gear that you wear these days are functional cross-roll, but getting an extra helm is a much lower burden than leveling up a whole new artifact or getting a hold of specific legendaries in the long term. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. So the idea of...
Sounds good, Ian.
I got this item. I'm going to use it for my tanking set or my healing set or whatever, instead of necessarily using the same helm for absolutely every set. That's fine. We've been doing that for ages anyway. Yeah,
and again, it depends on the level of seriousness with which you're trying to play the other spec, right? If you heal for your raids and you go DPS for questing, don't worry about it, right? You'll be fine regardless. Or if it's just you're going to hop in and tank a heroic dungeon for somebody, again, you'll be fine, even if you don't have customized gear. But if you genuinely are, the Shadow Priest who DPSs for 4 fights in the raid zone on progress and then heals for the others, you'll probably want a couple of different sets of gear, the same way you have a couple of different trinkets or a couple of different weapons.
Right.
But those items are available from a wide variety of sources throughout the game.
Okay. Sounds good. Next
Makes
question.
sense.
I'm just embracing it at
Stop.
this point.
Stop.
Does that make sense?
Don't acknowledge the meme.
I appreciate that.
It does make sense.
Don't acknowledge the meme. Stop it.
I'm paid to think
Stop it.
No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, question.
Didn't I fire you last time?
Probably.
You're still getting paid?
I don't know.
Need to look into that.
Yeah. Clerical error. Anyway, next question from SNR, who asked, will Azerite traits from more lucrative sources, for example, mythic raids, alter our playstyle in impactful ways, or are they simply passives with a greater effect than what we've already seen? So obviously, what we've seen so far in the beta, is basically limited to a couple of early questing pieces of gear.
Yes. So
what about the further on?
So there will be all new traits that show up for the first time in raids, as well as later patches throughout Battle for Azeroth. This is a system that we can build upon, continue to add additional things, and draw upon what we learned from the initial iterations of the system. The core spec modifying traits, I think those are something that we see as universal. You'll see those same traits that, whether it modifies your fireball, your mutilate, whatever, those will be popping up on raid gear as well. They'll be much more powerful in relative terms there. The strength of a given trait is directly proportional to the item level of the item that contains it. But if you look at the design of these, and this is, again, the sort of feedback we're interested in, the goal with most of these traits, the spec-specific ones especially, is for them to be gameplay modifying. I think the power level of these is comparable to, each one is like what a 2-piece set bonus might be, or what a signature trait on your artifact might have been, and you'll have up to 9 of them across all of your gear. These are doing things like, when you do X, it makes your next Y instant or more potent, or abilities or traits that get new buttons into your rotation if you seek those out, even more so if you like that gameplay style and you try to stack them across multiple pieces of Azerite armor. The desire is for these to very much be impactful and affect playstyle and be something that you have a preference towards based on your preferred playstyle, rather than just, passive bonuses that make your numbers bigger.
Okay. I guess kind of expanding on that a little bit, a lot of people have been sort of making some comparisons between the Azerite traits and things like Legion legendaries, some of which were very impactful, like the Fire Mage bracers is just the example that comes to mind. Do you think we might see anything that goes to that degree, or is it going to be a little bit more muted?
Okay, so the power level of a given legendary is higher than the power level of a single Azerite trait.
Sure.
Because you're going to have 9 active across your pieces of gear. 3 tiers of them, you're picking 1 in each, 3 slots. But the effect of the Power Blast bracers, that absolutely could be an Azerite trait.
Okay.
The chance for hardcasting a pyro to deal X additional fire damage, where that's a big number that makes it worth incorporating into rotation. That number would scale up further with the rest of your gear. And in the example I just gave, if you happen to have helm, shoulders, and chest that all had that effect, the cumulative impact could actually be more than the effect of the Legion legendary bracers.
Interesting.
And it probably would be budget-wise. So that's the sort of thing that we're aiming for here. Think of it as, like, the goal here is set bonuses. The goal here is interesting traits, not passive ones. There will, of course, be some passive options here or there, but that's for, it's a matter of, again, playstyle choice. If you're not looking to deal with extra procs, you're not looking to deal with things that complexify your rotation, there's value in just the, okay, occasionally I get proc crit when I do this as just something in the background, but that's not the core of the system. That's not what we're trying to make across the board.
Okay. Moving on, next question comes from Imoen, who asked, what kind of rewards will island expeditions give other than Azerite power?
All right, here we go.
So the primary reward for island expeditions is going to be artifact power. And yes, artifact power, not Azerite power. Your Heart of Azeroth is an artifact. You level it up with artifact power. We figured, why reinvent the wheel? I think we were originally kicking around ideas like Azerite power. We figured you're all going to call it just AP anyway. So why
beat around the bush?
Exactly. Why if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
But so
that's broken.
The core reward, and island expeditions will be one of the most lucrative sources of that. With I think our current plan is a weekly wrapper, where every week when you go to the board, you'll see scouting reports from what scouts have spotted on different islands. Hey, this week these 3 islands have lucrative caches of Azerite on them. We need to go out on behalf of our faction and explore, and you'll go to one of those islands, and once you've completed a certain total for the week, you'll get an extra bonus on top of that. And beyond that, you can just keep doing them open-endedly, and at that point, they'll be a bit less efficient. It's similar to the heroic of the day or other daily or weekly structures that we have. Beyond that, there'll also be opportunities to get gear, cosmetics, things like that. But we like to focus island expeditions on being the best way to get artifact power. Whereas dungeons, for example, are going to be much better for gear, less efficient for artifact power, and you kind of choose both the content that you're looking for, that you're interested in, and the rewards you're chasing.
I can live with that, but there will come a point
That's
where
good
we
too, 'cause it
don't
gives
need
you
artifact
a little bit
power.
of incentive to actually go around and do different things. Like
that is the goal.
yeah. Like I'm not necessarily gonna. There was an issue early on in Legion that we tried to address where it basically turned into, all right, you want artifact power, go and farm mob souls. Like
Yep, 3 chest
infinite
Maw
number of
9s
times.
all day long.
Exactly, yeah. So looking at it from the perspective of let's make this a little bit more lucrative in this way, let's make that a little bit more lucrative in that way, and then giving players different things to go after. I like the idea. I think it sounds good. I think it makes sense.
He's paid to say that.
Next question comes from Rick Rose, who asked, how will gearing in PvP work in Battle for Azeroth? Will it be random as it was in Legion, or will we see the return of vendors?
So
I hope
there
it's
will still
vendors.
be a random reward structure in BFA PvP, whether it's end of match
Gross.
rewards or weekly
Gross.
chests that are dependent upon your rating with what they contain. But we also have very much heard the feedback, and we agree that in PvP especially, there's a lot of value to more deterministic, predictable gearing, and that people miss just saving up conquest points, going to a vendor, buying your next item. And so the extra thing that's overlaid on top of that is throughout each season, there's going to be a weekly conquest progression where every week, as you earn conquest points, you will get the next piece of gear in a series, which is very similar. So it's not a vendor, but it's basically what the vendor amounted to, especially if you remember back in the day when individual pieces would have total conquest requirements for how much you had to earn in the season before you could purchase them. So you needed to earn, 20,000 whatever before you could buy your weapon.
Right.
And generally there was this natural progression of the order in which you'd get the pieces. You might get your helm first, so down the line. And so that's the plan. Over the course of a Battle for Azeroth PvP season, week 1, the end of the week, you'll get a PvP helm. Week 2, you might get pants. Week 3, shoulders, etc. I mean, exact gear slots to be determined.
Right.
Culminating in weapon, and then perhaps continuing at a higher tier of gear as you get deeper on into the season. But the goal is to guarantee that with time investment and dedication to the system, everyone will get the full set of gear. And then that can be complemented or accelerated through the random rewards. But no one should feel like, well, they're just continually unlucky and just are never going to get the piece that they want.
What about catching back up in the sense of, like, say I missed the first couple of weeks of the season, but I still want to get back into PvP. What happens in that case?
Exactly. There will be free catch-up with some acceleration. So if you think think of it as like there's a weekly conquest cap, effectively. When you fill your conquest bar, you get the reward. If you come in week 3 or you miss a couple of weeks, then you'll just be able to, in the course, however long it takes you to do, earn the conquest with a bit of acceleration along the way to get caught up to where the rest of the people are.
I'm okay with that.
So
That's good.
It's hopefully a
solid
more
fix,
straightforward
actually.
presentation. I think by just doing it through the UI and the rewards, we remove some of the abstraction of saving up a currency and going to a vendor and buying the pieces and the old, the 2 different conquest caps we used to have and the catch-up system.
Right,
It should just be a bit more transparent in general. But at TLDR, we understand the desire for predictable PvP gearing, and Battle for Azeroth should be a massive improvement in that regard.
Yeah, just being able to look at that next piece of gear and go, okay, if I win 10 more games, I'm going to get that piece of gear. That's a big deal. I'm super excited for that. Question from Binary, who asked, what is the plan for large battlegrounds now that they have been split from the normal battleground queue? So a lot of people have noticed in the alpha / beta that a couple of the larger battlegrounds have now been split off into a separate queue. What's going on there?
So yeah, I think in an upcoming build, those will be retitled Epic Battlegrounds. Ultimately, I think when it comes to PvP queuing, unlike Dungeons, which are all offering relatively the same experience in terms of tank, healer, 3 DPS, going through a certain environment, there's a massive difference between what Alterac Valley entails and what Warsong Gulch entails. Whether you're fighting mobs versus fighting players, the overall just feel of the entire experience. And when you queue up for something, it's not really fair to assume that you're interested in either of those 2 things interchangeably. So a lot of people are using blacklisting as a tool to, choose what they effectively didn't want to do, which also had effects on queue times and matchmaking. So currently, the plan is to pull out those 2 40v40 battlegrounds into their own bucket, there's no more blacklisting, so you either queue for the smaller group of battlegrounds, or the smaller scale battlegrounds, or the large ones.
Okay.
And I think this epic battleground queue is something we'd like to expand going forward. If you think back to old larger scale experiences in the outdoor world like Wintergrasp or Tol Barad, those could certainly find a home in this large battleground bucket. Some retuning probably involved and rescoping of those to sort of fit into a structure and a certain expected battleground length. But I think that could be a place for that content to really live on in a more relevant way than it is right now, where it's mostly for people who are hunting old achievements and just going back for kicks.
This is an idea that I was talking about on a podcast like 7 years ago now, before I was even at Blizzard. So I'm actually super excited to see this happening, because just another case of me being right.
Don't go for the glory lore.
Stick
to your realm.
That's important to me.
Don't overreach.
From Blood Guzzler. Actually, this might be somewhat related. Who asked, is Ashran being retired in Battle for Azeroth?
Please say yes.
Temporarily. Players may have noticed that Ashran achievements are moved into the Feat of Strength or Legacy bucket. We're looking, I think we are retiring it for now. That said, it also feels like exactly the sort of experience that could find a home in this Epic Battlegrounds category at some point in the future.
Nice.
If and when that happens, we would reactivate all the achievements and the rewards and all that. It's more of in the interim, it's more of a philosophy thing. We don't want to have achievements out there that aren't earnable, because that's intensely frustrating for people who want achievements and want the sense of completing available objectives. But we know there's a lot of affection for Ashran. There's still contingent of hardcore folks who go to still do it on a regular basis, but we'd like to find a way to give it more relevance and situate it as something that really has a place in the world, rather than this niche activity on an island back in an old expansion that very few people go to or really think about. So yeah.
Okay. Moving right along. Next question from Viva Tempest, who asked, rated PvP and racials have been a big subject of discussion time after time in relation to balance and value. Are there plans to deactivate those, since they create more frustration than joy in rated PvP?
Well, we don't want to create things that aren't joy. That's always the goal. But no, so racials, obviously, this has been a hot topic in PvP for as long as PvP has been a thing in World of Warcraft, even before rated existed. Other faction always has the OP racials. No, exactly. Right, exactly. Everything from original Everyman and Stoneform and all the other good stuff.
Remember when Forsaken were just immune to fear 100% of the time? Because I remember.
Good times. That said,
so good old days.
Why do racials exist? Racials exist partly for flavor, for depth. There's value to knowing that when you're facing a Tauren warrior versus a Blood Elf versus a Gnome, they have some different capabilities. They're not just completely identical to each other. And philosophically, as much as possible, we do want the game to feel like a cohesive whole, that when you're playing PvP, you are still playing World of Warcraft. You are engaging in the same experience under most of the same rules as people in other parts of the game. I think we actually probably went too far away from that in some ways in Legion, with the strict stat templates that, and the disabling of trinkets and things that made players feel like they couldn't customize themselves or differentiate themselves from one another in a way that, reinforced the RPG nature of what WoW is. Obviously, massive imbalances are a problem. So I think we've continued to further tackle this by looking at the outliers. Recently, we increased the effective cooldown on Everyman, and we completely redesigned Arcane Torrent on the Blood Elf side. Those were two of the more problematic ones in terms of what facing a 3 Blood Elf team meant for you as a caster, for example. And the goal is to get them to a point where they still feel relevant, but there's no clear right or wrong choice.
I don't think they feel relevant.
Again, not to sound like a broken record, but we'd be super curious to hear feedback on the current state of things after those changes.
That's specific feedback, mind you.
Are there any races that feel like now they're the no-brainer default choice, almost no matter what class you're playing, and if so, why?
Yeah, and especially in an expansion where we're introducing allied races, racial balance is obviously something that we're going to have to be paying a lot of attention to.
Exactly.
So feedback is more than welcome there.
Bull Rush is
question
busted.
from Vidget Gaming, who asked, will we see smaller power gains in Battle for Azeroth, so you won't have to tweak the difficulty of the world and have huge power differences between players in world PvP? So kind of referring to the the change that we made. I forget exactly which patch it was. Maybe 7.2, where added some outdoor scaling to the creatures.
Potentially, yes.
Broken Isles?
Yeah, I think so. Power gains. So this is feedback that we've been getting for a long time, but we feel like for raid and dungeon progression, especially in the game, there are certain levels of power increase that are necessary, both for rewards to feel meaningful and for gear progression to kind of do its job in terms of allowing players of different skill levels to defeat content over time. And this isn't something that's changed tremendously over the years. You know, we rounded the numbers off a little bit, but back in 2008, going from one tier to the next, you were getting 13 eye levels higher, which is, 13+% more power across the board. We increased that to 15 just so that the numbers were, just a bit rounder, easier to remember. But it's the same underlying philosophy of like how much, when you go into a new raid zone, a new patch comes out, or you start doing heroic for the first time after having done normal for a while, how much better does that new reward have to be for it to feel rewarding, for it to feel like, you got a meaningful upgrade? And the answer has consistently felt like somewhere in that 10 to 15% range. Obviously, in the very long term, that can lead to large power gaps between people who are multiple tiers ahead, the Mythic Raider and the Raid Finder Raider, or the person who has elite PvP gear and the person who's just getting started in the system. And in PvP in particular, that can have much more negative consequences. Yeah. Dragon doesn't complain when you're overpowered against them gear-wise. It's a bit different in PvP.
Yeah.
So in Legion, our solution was basically making gear not matter at all, making it matter very, very slightly based on your item level and templating everything. Like I mentioned a little while ago, we feel like that went a bit too far in terms of overriding and minimizing some of the core player customization aspects of just this being an RPG.
Sure.
So our plan in Battle for Azeroth is to actually lean on and learn from a lot of the lessons we experienced with outdoor scaling and use that tech to make power differences between players mean less, especially in the outdoor world as well as in rated contexts. So the same way that I can be level 108 and you can be level 103, we can group together and fight the same mob in the outdoor world or in a dungeon and still hold our own, contribute, and feel like we're having a scaled experience, the same way that I can be 108 and heal you as a 103 player, and that all works. All of that actually applies to PvP as well, or could apply to PvP, and we can just do it using item level more so than player level. So there can be a world where I am 50 or 60 eye levels higher than you, but in terms of how we actually fight each other, in terms of the damage I do to you, the damage you do to me, I'm only, let's say, 10% stronger than you instead of 50% stronger than you, in a way that keeps the gear mattering, but doesn't mean that I, just blow you up in a couple of globals. But also I can still use my trinkets, I can still stack crit or stack mastery if that's what I so choose. And again, the goal is for this to be something that just kind of happens and feels, transparent. You run into a player in the outdoor world, you fight.
Oh no, what happened with that drop frame?
But
Sorry
it should
about
be a more
that, guys.
competitive, engaging experience. This is especially important with the renewed place of world PvP in war mode. That's why we knew this was a problem we had to solve, since we didn't want to. We were dissatisfied with the templating system to begin with, but we never wanted to really extend that to something that was going to take place in the outdoor world, because at that point, like, who even are you as a character in WoW if none of your stats matter?
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Obviously,
that's interesting, thinking about from the perspective of, wow, where did that thought go? I had a thought. It was a great point I was about to make. It's gone now. We're just going to move on. Next question from MC Willix, who said, with the introduction of war mode, will there be any incentive to PvP within the main cities, such as Stormwind, Orgrimmar,
I would love for there to be.
Nothing specifically new were added. I think there's still the achievements to kill enemy faction leaders, and people will sometimes just get a big raid together to do that for fun. But I think war mode is more focused on the outdoor world experience and, more free-form encounters there.
Okay, cool. And we were talking about this yesterday. If you, just for clarity, if you are out in the outdoor world doing war mode stuff, you group up with a bunch of other people and you say, hey, let's go raid Stormwind, you still get to go raid Stormwind. There's no, I think that happens there.
The capital cities, Stormwind, Orgrimmar, and others, there will effectively only be one version of those. Like, even on a PvP server today, if you're an Alliance player, Orgrimmar is Horde territory, which is to say, like, 20 players sitting at the inn in Orgrimmar is not PvP flagged. You are automatically attackable when you go in there. That's, those rules will still apply. and we don't want to split people up in capital cities. Like if you're in the city, it doesn't matter whether I'm in war mode and you're not. We should be able to see each other and interact with each other. It's different when we're out in the world adventuring.
Cool. Next question from Silverrest, and this has been one of the more popular questions we had submitted. Silverrest asked, when deciding on allied races, why did you choose Void Elves when High Elves seemed much more of an organic and popular choice?
God damn it, people. Let it go.
So,
they're the same thing.
So, basically, Blood Elves kind of are High Elves with slightly different eye color, different backstory in terms of their, their relationship with magic and the Sunwell, but they are, like, if what you want to be is a fair-skinned, light, blonde-haired, tall, majestic elf, that is a Blood Elf. And giving that race directly to the Alliance, I think, would have blurred a lot of the lines between the two factions, but also there isn't a clear example of who or what High Elves are as a larger group that still remains in Azeroth.
That's because they were mostly wiped out.
Area again for the first time, but they're not out there in the same way. And so we're looking to, when we add allied races, there's desire to have things be a bit more distinct, especially between the two factions, with the faction conflict being so prominent. And so the Void Elf angle, as tied into the story of Argus and the powers that Ilaria awakened and was able to train others to harness, I think was able to give something that felt a bit like a Blood Elf, but had a unique flavor of its own to the Alliance. That said, obviously understand that if you love Alliance, you're an Alliance player, and you just want to be a fair-skinned, light-haired, blue-eyed elf, sorry, the Horde is there waiting for you. Eye color's not quite the same, but maybe there'll be contact lenses in the future. We never know. Anything's possible in the future, but no plans, I think, in the near term to add High Elves as an allied race. Sorry, I accept all of the hate mail that I'm about to get for this, but that's where we stand.
This is hashtag blame Ian.
No, that's a solid choice.
Fallen, who asked, are you guys going to reconsider your stance on Death Knights for allied races that make sense if said Death Knights cannot earn heritage armor?
I actually was
I guess
talking
kind of
to
unpacking
someone
this
about
question a little bit
the
for
other day.
Anyone who's maybe not quite following. It's kind of talking about the idea of, well, obviously Death Knights start at level 55. Demon Hunters, for example, start at level 98. Why not open up those classes to allied races and just make it so that they can earn the heritage armor, seeing as how the heritage armor is earned by.
I think that's fair.
The heritage armor is a factor, but it's not the main reason. I think the answer to this is no plans to do it in Battle for Azeroth. I do not think we will let the hero classes be allied races in Battle for Azeroth. In the future, the door is definitely open to it. Some of it has to do with the exact nature of the story around allied races right now. Both factions reaching out to, recruit new ones and bring them into the fold.
Sourfang's son was a brown orc.
Demon Hunters as well is tied to something.
He was also a Death Knight.
And
we killed them.
As we establish the feature for the first time, there's value in defining allied races by default as, hey, they start at level 20. That's part of what makes them special. That's part of who they are. This is the structure for how they fit into the world. That said, I completely understand if you are a lifelong Death Knight player and you're looking at some new allied race, feeling like you just want to experience that, you're missing out.
Yeah.
Super sympathetic. It's something we want to make happen in the future, but not in this first iteration of the system.
Okay. Maybe eventually someday we will have Death Knights that don't come from that one pack of people that exist in Eastern Plaguelands.
Quite possibly, yes.
Next question from... this is a collection of letters from Twitter who asked, are there any updates regarding loot methods in BFA? Personal loot only will dramatically impact class choice for high-end rating guilds.
Right. I'm guessing the FSY and the Twitter handle is Fat Shark, yes. Speaking of high-end rating guilds. So
yeah, there we go.
Shout out to those guys.
I don't know who that is, but Fat Shark, yes.
No updates other than what we have said still stands. Just to kind of revisit this issue and discuss it a bit further, since I know there have been a lot of questions and concerns. Personal loot really has been the default throughout most of World of Warcraft for some time now. If you look at the game today in Legion, all of dungeons, PvP, the outdoor world, all of these systems are exclusively personal. The only place where any other type of loot is used is in guild groups in raid content. And that is actually a small wedge of the overall loot system as a whole. Contrary to some of the
this
speculations,
Q&A,
this
but it
change
is a
wasn't
bit
made
dull.
to stop or to curb
not a lot of
high-end
juice.
split rating in the very high-end world-first scene. Yeah, and that's something we want to do. We're not sad that this change might have some impact on it. But the reason why we didn't take action against split rating sooner was that we didn't want to make a
Show me
change
the
system
juice
that was going to be disadvantageous to a large number of players just for the sake of a small handful.
Yeah.
That's not the focus. Personal loot, the advantages it has, aside from just general consistency throughout the game world, is that in a lot of ways, it's more about there is more personal agency. There's more control as an individual over your fate. Yes, there are a number of high-end groups out there. There are tight-knit guilds that have harmoniously awarded loot over the years, and for some people, there's some loss of control. Completely understand that. Obviously understand that if you are the loot master or if you are on the loot council, then that's a great system. And I say that as somebody who's, like you have no problems with it because, of course, you are even-handedly distributing the loot, and you will lose the ability to do so. As somebody who's run DKP systems in the past, who's handled this, I understand, how you prioritize set pieces, how you prioritize people with higher attendance sometimes, tanks for specific encounters, whatever it may be. But tradability within the personal system still allows that to an extent. But what group and master loot often mean for many people is that their rewards they're at the mercy of others in ways that often aren't fair. How common is it for a trial to join, tag along for their couple of weeks during the trial period, participate in not just farm content, but a new boss kill, and not have a chance of getting any loot at all because the guild's policy is trials aren't eligible for loot? Or to have your moment of excitement, you kill a boss, even if you're not thinking of this or verbalizing it, even if you're not thinking it, then you're not. But if you're not verbalizing it, when you kill a boss, it's not necessarily about whether there's something on the corpse that you want. It's about whether someone else decides that you get it. Like that moment of actual reward is disconnected, and whether it's some numerical system or people switching over to the officer channel to decide whether you're worthy or not, that's what's determining whether you get the loot. It's, at the end of the day, you deserve the loot if you participated in the encounter and helped defeat the boss. And trading exists to allow the social structures to play out. You can pass on, things that aren't upgrades for you to your friends to help them out. You have control within that space. But those are the upsides that we see there. I think going forward, it's not called personal loot anymore. It's just loot. Like, this is just how loot works in World of Warcraft across the entire board. And for a subset of the game that's been accustomed to a different way, I think this is just bringing them in with the rest of the way the world has worked.
Okay. Yeah, as someone who ran a DKP system for like 3 or 4 years and then a loot council for another like 6, personally, I'm actually a big fan of personal loot because it means a lot less for me to have to worry about. But obviously, understandable that there's some concerns.
I'm a big personal loot fan guy.
Well for everyone in the long term. Question from Arcarius, a similar question, asking how will the eye level / trading restriction for personal loot work mechanically going forward?
The same way it always has. I think if you get an item in a given slot that is not the highest item level that you've ever seen in that slot, then it should be tradable to people who are on the tap list, who participated in the dungeon encounter or raid encounter or whatever it may be. And note that is that you have ever seen. You don't have to carry around high eye-level pieces that you don't want to use in your bags. Doesn't matter if you got that, in current terms, 980 piece and vendored or disenchanted it. If the game treats you as having a 980 in that slot, anything that's lower than 980 will be tradable.
So, sorry, community manager warning bells going off in my head. When you say that you have ever seen, you can't just walk around inspecting people to...
Not literally ever seen. Sorry. That you have ever looted from and had soulbound to you. If someone handed you a BOE and you cradled it in your arms for a few moments and passed it along to someone else, that doesn't count. The item has to have become bound to you and lost its tradability, including vendoring it, disenchanting it, obliterating it, other similar systems.
Okay. That's
so are we keeping the
legal
Obliterum?
disclaimers may apply.
Was that Obliterum confirmed?
Next question from Ilkoland, who asked, now that class tier sets are gone, how many appearance sets will there be in a raid per armor type? Just one?
Yes, just one, but we're going to be able to make many more of these types of sets across the entire game. I think as we back in Legion, for example, one of the kind of regrettable things, and this is how actually raids in WoW have worked just about forever. All the armor that you got from Emerald Nightmare was recolor and variants of the Nighthold loot and the Nighthold sets, because that was the raid tier for that gear, or that was the raid gear for that tier. Same looking at Highmaul versus Foundry, and so on and so forth going back. The goal here is much more themed gear that feels like it comes from the place that you're adventuring through. When you kill a corrupted Titan boss, you should get gear that looks like it came from that, and not, something that's just an abstract, arbitrary piece of art. And so Uldir has its own unique art sets. The follow-up raid will as well, and so on and so forth down the line, as well as more sets from from game modes like Warfronts and so forth. I think the goal here is to just provide different flavors of expression for people in this world where transmog is so popular. We've said it before, like we've gone through 21 different takes on mage class fantasy.
Did you just say cakes?
Cool about being able to explore.
Did you just say through 21 cakes?
What is troll cloth? What is, not to spoil future things, but other takes on that archetype. And if you really love, you want to look like the iconic warlock,
he said
there are no lack of appearances out there for people to transmog to.
I'm the snack
very
daddy.
Commonly,
Not him.
We see many people are using older sets already.
Yeah.
So this is just adding more looks and tying thematically the loot that you get to the place you get it from.
Yeah, when you think about it from the perspective of having transmog in the game, it's actually kind of exciting to have tier sets that are themed after where they're from, because like you say, we've had so many that were themed after the class themselves for so long that there's already a very iconic, you think of a paladin, you imagine Full Judgment set or something like that right away. Thinking about it, okay, well, let's look at it from the perspective of Uldir. What's an Uldir looking armor set? That's actually pretty cool.
That is the goal.
Cool. This will probably be the last question that we have time for here today. Comes from Pear Butter, who asked, the intro quests on the beta are painting the Horde in a negative light. Should I be worried about my faction turning evil?
Yes.
Evil's, it's a matter of perspective.
There's probably a lot of Alliance players that are like, what are you even talking about?
Yeah, you've been evil
You've
all
been
along.
evil the whole time.
No one told you? Are we the bad guys? So
Are we the bad guys?
Some have said, I think the attribution of this quote is all over the place, but all that's needed for evil to prosper is for the good men of the world to do nothing. The Horde has many facets to it, and there are aspects of what the Forsaken have represented for a long time that have not necessarily been directly in line with what the Tauren represent, for example. I mean, compare the events at the Wrathgate to what you know about Tauren culture. Yet there's been this uneasy partnership between these groups for some time. And there's similar tensions and similar discordance that we see throughout the other factions. These entities aren't monolithic. And that said, evil, again, there's a lot of harsh things that happen in war in general. When groups are fighting for survival, at the end of the day, they resort to desperate measures when it comes to the choice between that and extinction. There's a lot of story to tell going forward. I don't want to dig too far into this, but both sides should be worried about this. I think Azeroth is a world of gray. It's never been a world of black or white. I think that's one of the things that was a defining aspect of the franchise from its earliest days. Right? You looked at Warcraft, orcs, and humans.
We did,
and the stories told in that world.
I've looked at that.
And you look at these noble, recognizable folks who look like us, and then these giant green, brutish monsters, and naturally might assume, well, okay, right, humans are the good guys, and orcs are evil because they look like monsters. But that's not what Warcraft is about. There's more nuance, and that's not changing anytime soon.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for coming on and going through these questions with us here today. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and hanging out and sending in the questions.
Sorry we couldn't get to more stuff, and sorry again for early rambling.
Hey, guys.
It's fine.
A lot of
I see chat numbers going up right as the Q&A's
No, it's all good. Thanks again so much, everybody, for tuning in. If you have access to the beta, please do go on there, check it out.
I would love to, but all the PAX East invites are broken, Lore.
Appreciated.
Fix it.
Pretty much everything
Fix
that's
it.
available in there. So, yeah.
Fix it.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you all.
We'll see you next time.
Take care.
All right, cool. So that was the Q&A. All in all, I thought it lacked a lot of juice. I was happy we got into the mechanics of it. I was happy we finally explored what Azurite necklaces are gonna do. Holy shit, that got really loud. Let's just... yeah, let's just go like that. Anyway. I was happy we figured out some mechanics. World PvP, I didn't expect those questions to come up. I'm happy they did. Happy to see PvP vendors returning. And the weekly progression thing, I think it's going to be a nice thing for PvP. I think it's going to help kind of sustain it as content. But, yeah, other than that, guys, what did you think? Let me know. Did you like the Q&A? Did you hate the Q&A? I did hate the fact that they were memeing themselves. I'll admit that. That was kind of bullshit, in a way. Because you don't kill the joke by agreeing with the joke. And that's just made everything a little less happy. But yeah, that's gonna be it for the stream. I hope everyone has a great day. We'll be back in just under 3 hours with Tommy Rafenis from Super Meat Boy. He created it. We'll be interviewing him then. Alright, stay classy, guys.